is so sad. I'm almost weeping for him.
Walter calls him the Panzerpult.
Okay, let's start. Let's proceed in an orderly way. Let's overcome all our confusions. Oh, but here is the Panzergeneral there. And here's the real one. Look at this here. I have a picture, you can see. That's General Paulus.
Paulus?
Yeah, before Stalingrad. That's the guy who failed in Stalingrad. He resigned. He was in bed when the Russians came. He lay in bed. In the warehouse. In the basement. In Stalingrad. And he had just been made into a marshal. Oh, it was the highest honor. And he was supposed to die. But he wanted to live a little bit longer. Okay. Well, so we have 8 today, right? That is our 8th discourse. That we are on the same page. Okay. Discourse 8. And then, how about the test? Do we have something? Okay. Wonderful. Okay, let's put it over there. And I will give it back to you after the break. Wonderful success. Great, thank you so very much. So we will have the next test on March 13. And then we do the same thing again. I give you some questions and you have the other choice again as we had it before. Test number 2. Excursion to Congregation of Moses we had. Alex was with me, right? Alex experienced it. Why that is of interest for us, I think I invited you, is that the critical theory, of course, is they're Jews. The first generation are Jews. And you really feel it when they become Aryans. Somehow it doesn't fit. There is a difference, you know. As far as this race stuff is concerned, because these terrible race things have happened, the liberals don't want to talk about it anymore and behave almost as if there was no race. But there is an anthropology of race. What gets wrong with it is when one race suddenly asserts that it's on top of the others and can use the others, and it's the predator, the others are the prey, and so on. That's when it all becomes devilish. But if you think that each of these races on each of the continents is an expression of humanity, physically, also personality, there are differences definitely between the classes. So, and you see the little rabbi there, the bivak there, his gestures and so on. That is all, of course, part of Judaism. And they are aware of it. We asked him about mixed marriages, and he is strictly against it. He would bless, 2 Jewish homosexuals, but he will not have mixed marriages because people lose their faith. But then it's also a thing of civilization. Judaism is civilization, and Judaism is also a race. It's a nation as well. And so if the genome gets mixed up, then it will happen what happened to the 10 tribes of the north. They were settled in Mesopotamia, not in one place, but they were spread all over the place. And so they were all assimilated, as that's called. They were sucked up. And that is the great danger of the Jewish people. They don't want to be assimilated. But many are really assimilated. So, and we said already that, of course, Horkheimer connected the second and the third commandment, not to make images of the absolute, with Immanuel Kant, not to penetrate the thing in itself. And so they built a bridge between Judaism and Enlightenment, the bourgeois Enlightenment, and the Marxist Enlightenment. Marx was a Jew again. And I asked the rabbi, if of those people who lose their faith are still Jews, and he said, well, he didn't know really. He said, if they are good people, and they're still Jews. I said, well, Freud and Marx were good people, so he must be Jew. But then he suddenly came out with his American, not Jewish, but American prejudice against Marx. And what he said was that Marx wanted to establish the Messianic Realm by human activity. And there was something to it. All 3 Abrahamic religions can cooperate with Marxism if Marxism does not make the assertion that the realm of freedom on the realm of necessity, that this is a replacement of the Messianic age. And Marx never did. Marx said that also the realm of freedom on the realm of necessity will be transitory. It will be a new phase, humanistic, and it will be much better than the capitalistic one, but it will be a human phase, and it will be on the realm of natural necessity, and there will be work, necessary work. It will be organized better in a more human way, and so on. And then there will be more time, less working hours, more time in order to have freedom, which means what Fromm calls then being, the city of being. Being means that one can realize one's whole potential, one's eyes, one's ears, and one's touch, one's analytical understanding, one's dialectical thinking. So the full unfolding, full evolution of the individual is the idea. So in that sense, Marx was a liberal who emphasized, the individual's quality and so on. But he knew that if you can do that, depends on the circumstances. And therefore he was interested that the circumstances would be changed in such a way that not only a few, but that all people could realize themselves fully. So that is the idea. So in that sense, I think Marx was a good guy, and the rabbi doesn't have to worry about it, but he shares the American prejudices against Marx. So, but Marx knew that he was a Jew, and Freud, Marx of course became a Protestant. He was baptized, and Freud knew it even better. Freud said, "You will find out someday, that psychoanalysis is through and through Jewish." And I think that's true with Karl Landauer, whom we mentioned, the psychoanalyst of Horkheimer, who founded the Psychoanalytical Institute in Frankfurt, and Horkheimer was the director of the Critical Theory Institute, and these two institutes worked together. As a matter of fact, they worked in the same rooms. Landauer and his people, and Fromm and so on, they taught in the rooms of the Critical Theory Institute there, so it was very close. I think they both were right. And the great disappointment of Freud was, of course, the guy there, what is his name there?
Jung.
This Jung, Carl Gustav Jung, because there is a movie on this. I don't know if you have seen it. Mm-hmm. I don't know how true it is, but it's very interesting there, and it shows at least some true elements there. Freud hoped that he could break out of the ghetto, that he could walk into the real world, the Aryan world too, and there he had that Siegfried there, Carl Gustav Jung, and they cooperated with each other, and then they took a trip to America. They came here on a ship, and on the ship, Freud analyzed the dreams of Jung. I'm thinking of these dreams now because my son, in the state of Washington, he was sent by his firm there to a psychoanalyst, and she then asked him about his dreams, and he said, "I will keep my dreams for myself." So there's something about telling other people your dreams, but Jung told Freud his dreams, and Freud analyzed it then. But then Jung said, "Well, how about your dreams?" And then Jung said, it would undermine my authority, and so at least Jung said that this was the point where he separated himself internally. It was authoritarian somehow. Now, for Freud, it was another reason. Jung had a patient, and that's what you can see in the movie. The movie is called Dangerous Method. And he had a student, and female student, and she had powerful hysterical attacks, and he applied the Freudian analysis to her, but at the same time did the unforgivable crime in psychoanalysis, what they do always in the movies, namely the analyst who has sex with the patient. Freud was strictly against that. He had an almost Puritan code in terms of the behavior, because there is transference happening. Transference means the patient projects her father or her lover or what on you, and then there may be even transference the other way around. You may find the student lovable and so on, but and that transference could happen, but you were not allowed to touch her or to have sex with her and so on. And so I think they even had some sadistic type of sex. He beat her up and other things. Now I don't know how true all that is, but she, after she finished up her studies, she wrote an interesting paper in which she challenged a very important position in Freud, which has been corrected by Fromm and Marcuse, or they revised him. And she said that sexuality was in itself aggressive. That means that sexuality overcame the ego. That sexuality destroyed the ego. That means you think sometimes when people fall in love, they do such strange things. They give up their studies, they take tremendous advantages, they get illegitimate children, ruin their whole career, and so on and so on. So because the genus process, the species process, is so powerful that the ego of the partners gets lost in the process. So that was her thesis, and Freud thought it was wrong, but he took her on anyway as a student. And then, of course, the Jewishness came through. You know, he told her what she left Jung, and it was very painful for him. He fell into years and years of depression. It was during the First World War, before and during, I think. And so there's a dialogue between Fromm and that woman, and she said, you know, we are Jews, and we can never get together with the Aryans. It's hopeless, so stay with your own kind. And she married a Jewish Russian Jew psychoanalyst. And then she had another discussion. She was pregnant at that time, and she visited again Jung. Jung's wife was somehow a scholar in her own right. She saw his depression, and she thought that the student, very generous in that the student maybe could help him, and so on. So Jung and the student had a discussion, and he had another girlfriend in the meantime, which was again an unforgivable crime in terms of Freud. And then she found out, of course, that the new girlfriend was a replacement of her, and he said, this baby should really be mine, and she said, yeah, probably, and so on. So there was a relationship, but Freud said she fell for that Siegfried, she called him a Siegfried, and Tannhäuser and all this. So, so therefore they separated, and I think slowly Jung got, during this First World War, he got out of his trouble, and he became famous. He developed an Aryan psychology in opposition to the Semitic psychology of Freud. So here's our question, which is so very important: to what extent sciences and theories are the product of the real life process, be it now the class struggle or be it the race struggle, and so on. So there is a sociology of sociology, where you ask this Durkheim, that he is a Jew, what does that have to do with his, or he's a bourgeois, what does that have to do with his theory, you know, or this Heidegger is a low bourgeois, does that have something to do with that he developed a fascist type of a philosophy? So that just on the side. So it was really tragic in a certain sense, and I think Fromm also saw that Jung had become a shaman again, you know, mythologized again, fell back into mythology, because the Enlightenment, which also the critical theorists took over, they have two definitions of Enlightenment. I just wrote that online. I write a whole book for each of those 40 students. It takes me hours and hours. I cannot do this anymore. I don't know how to do it because I may have the same number or more. They want me to have 50 in some of one. So, but nevertheless, what did I want to say now? Okay, now I lost the thought. But
Two forms of enlightenment? Two forms of
Oh
enlightenment?
yeah, two forms of enlightenment. One is to free people from their fears and make them into masters of their fate. That may come from Marx there and from the bourgeoisie. The other one is where it is ego should be. Where it is ego should be. And that is Freud's definition of enlightenment. Id, that is the will to life. That is what the Gautama, the Buddha, discovered. The will to life as the source of all suffering. To remove the images of the will to life emancipates us, frees us, liberates us. That's why the monks, the mystics, and so on, ascetics, free themselves from these images and starve the will to life to death. This will to life has a sexual component in the broad sense, not phallic sexual, but sexual in general sense. Sexual component, libidinous component, and it has an aggressive component, killer instincts and so on. So, and this is then what happened with Freud there. The girl wrote that sexuality is in itself destructive of the ego. But Freud discovered that it was, or thought he discovered clinically that there were two fundamental instincts. One was the libidinous one, and the other one was the killer instinct. And then the critical theorists tried to revise that, Marcuse and Fromm, and I think also Wilhelm Reich, who was another one who got Marx and Freud together. And they said that only when our sexuality is faded, that means if we cannot get the car which we want to, if we cannot get the woman which we want to, if we cannot get the food which we want or whatever, then we become aggressive. It happened in China yesterday. There was a CEO who wanted to have a plane, and the first plane didn't fly, and then the second plane didn't fly. So he destroyed the whole desk there of the people, the airline people. He was even a political advisor, but he lost it really. You know, he took something, he banged against the glass, it wasn't strong enough, and then his wife helped him. His wife came and took something, but the son wanted to restrain both of them, but he didn't have a chance with the boy. So that is frustration. You know, he wanted to go there, and then something interfered in his libidinous desires, and then he got angry and started to smash people. He had to resign already, I think, and it happened here too. And the guy got 50 days in prison or something like that for getting outrageous like this. Okay, so but that as far as the movie is concerned, I think the movie makes it a little plastic. I don't know, if that was really true with this love affairs or with all of his love affairs, because he usually looked like such a bourgeois type of a guy, and his wife, was really the pillar. It's a typical Swiss woman. I took my vacations in Switzerland, and I met some of them, the mothers in the house, and 5 children they had, I think. And she was the foundation of the whole thing. She carried the whole thing. And I think she was also rich, and he had a huge house at the lake and a beautiful place, which he made into some kind of a medieval thing.
Yeah, he built a castle.
Built a castle, yeah, but a medieval castle, His father was a Protestant minister, and but he for a long time, was not really a believer. But the main thing was when this crisis was over with this woman, then he became famous, and he became famous with this Aryan type of a psychology, without the Semitic decadence and all that. And then he had this idea of the archetypes, the anima, the animus, and the self. And it was at that time that he also became a fascist, which was unusual because he was safe in Switzerland, so they couldn't reach him really. So he did it voluntarily. And he interpreted the whole thing that Hitler was this charismatic person who symbolized, there were always symbols and archetypes. Hitler symbolize the archetype of self, which otherwise the Gautama did, the Buddha or Jesus or so, were the symbols of this archetype. So he estimated the German movement very highly. And then at a certain point he did what Eliade did not do, what Carl Schmitt did not do, what Heidegger did not do. He had some kind of a conversion. He did not change his Aryan psychology, that remained an Aryan psychology, but he had a new interpretation, namely each archetype has a shadow. So the anima is the beautiful woman, and then there is a witch. The animus is the beautiful Siegfried, but then there is also a bad, evil dwarf, or whatever. You can see him all in Wagner's operas there. And then the self had also a bright side, like for instance Jesus, and then a dark side, Satan. So when you on Monday night we read the story there of the temptation, where Jesus was the representative of being in Freudian ways, and Satan was the representative of having, of consumerism, of power, and so on. So the self had these two sides, and so he interpreted now that the Germans had projected their shadow on the Jews, and that was the psychological reason why they killed them. They killed the Jews, 6 million or how many. So, however why that is, but it meant something new in his life. And he also had a Jewish secretary then who wrote a book about him and thought that he was a very religious man. And then Fromm wrote a book on who was more religious, Freud or Jung. And the usual thing will be, that people say, well, Jung is a more religious person. Because for him, in the id, there was not only now sex and killer instinct, but there were these archetypes. And he found these archetypes not only in fairy tales, but also in all the world religions. He traveled through Africa and found their stories and so on. He went through India and looked at Hinduism and Buddhism and collected legends and stories and so on. And everywhere he found those three archetypes. So it looks very religious, as if he was, massively concerned with mythology. But what Fromm said is that Freud was the more religious person, and that has to be explained now how that happens. For Fromm and for all the critical theorists, Enlightenment, which seems to be so much in opposition to religion, think of our culture struggles here, at the same time started already in the religions. And in the good religions, which do not only console people, but which also sharpen their conscience, these good religions did already that. That means they posited ego where it is. They strengthened the ego. They helped an Odysseus to rise out of the mythological world of Homer with all the gods, with Aphrodite and Zeus and this owl of Minerva, the Minerva and so on. Already Minerva and Athena, these are the gods of wisdom and so on. So that means there is already in religion the emphasis on thinking as transcendence, to get out of the nature gods and also the historical gods, and with this direction toward the one God and so on and so on. So that and this is there in Freud, and this is already there in religions. And if you take this definition, then religion is really present in Freud much more than in C.G. Jung. So that means Freud then continues the Enlightenment work. The word Enlightenment comes from John, number 1. And he came into the world, and he was the light of the world, and he enlightened the world, and the world was dark, and he brought light into it. That is where that name Enlightenment comes from. So it was a religious name, which was then secularized. So Freud secularized what was there already in religion. He continues the fundamental intent of religion. That's why Freud is more religious. Now, on the other hand, what Jung did, after he had been a student of Kant for some time. He was a Kantian, but then he became romantic. Sometimes there is a reaction against enlightenment, against analytical understanding, against disenchantment. What the Pope does tomorrow night is disenchanting for many religions. That the Holy Father, the High Priest, can retire is unthinkable for people. There are strong reactions from the German hierarchy. You cannot come down from your cross, they said. He's some kind of a traitor. He promised, 7 or 8 years ago, that he would be this donkey of God and would carry the burden, and now he climbs from the cross. All the other popes, they carried it through. John, the guy who was together with John Paul II when he died, and it was a horrible, long death where he begged that they let him die and so on. So, and this pope, he doesn't want to go through with this, and so he climbed down from the cross. By the way, there is a movie, The Fourth Temptation of Christ, and there Christ does, but only in his dream, he does climb down from the cross and lives, like Muhammad would say, and the Gnostics and so on, that he lived a natural death. But first he married Mary Magdalene, has 4 children and so on, and lives a normal life. So that's what they blame him for. And that is from internally, people who have a mythological view of the papacy or also of Christianity. Do you have to carry your cross and you carry it to the end, to torture and so on and so on. By the way, our thesis, which I talked about the last time, that it was the conflicts which drove him into retirement, he mentioned something. He gave some short statements there. And he took the story of the boat on the Lake of Galilee. I've been there, the Lake of Galilee, and I walked there on a Sunday morning, and there came an Israeli there, and he came and he greeted nicely and said, "Nice place here." And then he said to me, "Do you know that is where the guy walked on the water?" I said, "I know this guy with the water as long as I can remember. I know these guys who walked on the water." Yeah, that's where he walked. And then he went on again. Well, so the Pope took that story of the walking of the water was there too, but it was the same thing. But Jesus was with the boat there. Jesus was sitting in the boat, and then a storm came. So the Pope said they were good times, but then there were also storms, and then he felt that God was asleep, and there were, and these storms are raging. And I think we said the last time, and we don't want to repeat that again, that there was the fall of scholasticism and neo-scholasticism, and then he came with patristics, and both of these things are not sufficient to respond to modernity. So, by the way, the title of the Spiegel about the Pope was Rebellion Against God. The Pope's resignation is a rebellion against God. God wanted him to hang on the cross, and he climbed down. That is what he is doing. Now he has to give up his red shoes. He wears red shoes. He
cannot keep his brown ones that he got in Mexico.
He can leave the brown ones, but his ring is taken away from him too, and that will be put into his coffin. The symbolism in Catholicism is unbelievable, and that's a nice place for Jung to go around there. So, nevertheless, Jung turned around the Enlightenment idea and said, where ego is, it should be. That is Romanticism, and in his own life, that really happened. One has the feeling that not his id went into his ego, but his ego was sucked up again in the id. He surrounded himself with these medieval world, and his house was full of Latin verses and so on. And he cooked his own meal there, and he did stone masoning and did all kinds of things. So he went as a romantic. He was thinking back into this romantic world. That's the great romantics in Germany. Did it too in protest against the Enlightenment, which is so bright and so sharp and analytical and so on. So man needs something else for his soul, and he emphasized that very much with his archetypes. Okay, so that was about the movie, that was about the congregation of Moses there. They are the first generation. I think the whole project is Jewish, of the critical theory. If they would lose that Jewish gene there, it would soon lose the sharpness of the critique. The Jewish dialectics is much sharper than the Greek ones. And so when I read all the literature, there's a massive amount what this has been written about the Frankfurt School, unbelievable. But a lot of it is of this Aryan type, of this revisionistic type, and I miss this Jewish, sharp Jewish dialectical elements. It gets smoothed out somehow and made more peaceful and harmonious, and then all gets lost. Okay, so that was about the excursion, but we want always to think, Habermas is not a Jew, and Hannes is not a Jew, but we want to be awake, are they really following and realizing the fundamental intentions of Horkheimer, who was definitely, a very intelligent person, and he was the real leader, sometimes a little bit authoritarian. So whatever we study, at least that was our method, my God, and Dustin and that we think of him, as the leading figure, and then see what they did with it. Adorno was even more intelligent than Horkheimer, but they worked together, and sometimes you can still, when you look at the dialectic of Enlightenment, they wrote it together. If you're very sharp and you know both of them well, you can see which parts Adorno wrote and which not. But other ones, if you don't, not too deep into the whole thing, it sounds very, very similar, and they were very similar. Adorno was 8 years younger, so he was the younger one, and he had studied in Germany. He stayed along, was only half Jew, and he had his mother was a pianist, and was a singer, famous singer in Germany. They traveled to Austria and everywhere, and Paris, and they came from Corsica. They were connected with Napoleon somewhere, and coming from Corsica, they were Catholic. So Adorno is interesting. He had a Jewish father, who, by the way, had not much influence on his life. He was a owner, entrepreneur. He had a wine business in Frankfurt, where I was born there. He lived on the east side. Of course, he's my father's generation, so it's not my generation anymore. So he was baptized Catholic. He had a Protestant education, had a Jewish father, and then became a Marxist. But an unbelievably bright type of a guy. So he started as music critic. He studied under Alban Berg in Vienna, the experimental music, which he taught to my friend Walter Dirks there in Frankfurt. And he then played piano. He composed. I have a record there of his chamber music. And then he became, expert in musicology, science of music, and then he became a philosopher, Hegelian philosopher, left Hegelian philosopher, and then he became a sociologist, the authoritarian personality, and all that. He developed an Adorno scale, for making empirical studies, and he got that from he developed this authoritarian personality and evolutionary personality, and from then Adorno applied it once to the labor unions in California, and there were so many authoritarian personalities that it could not be published. And Löwenthal has it in his heritage still there. It's sitting there. It was never published. But in the 50s, he did another study. It's called The Authoritarian Personality, that you can see in the library, and that was published. But that was broader, the broad population. But that was done with the Adorno scale, and then this Adorno or Fromm scale got Adorno's name. Adorno applied it then with Funk, who is still active today. I think he's a Protestant theologian, who published all Fromm's work, and they applied it to Mexico City the last time, to a village near Mexico City. So, and Fromm continues to apply it. So, okay, that's just a little bit in the background there. So this is all what we want to say about this Jewish background, and I would say also the idea of social justice. That happens already with Marx. I asked the rabbi, I said, well, Marx, took it from the prophets, social justice idea. The rabbi said, yes, but he distorted it all. I don't know how he distorted it. Probably with making it part of the class struggle, but he distorted it because he wanted to establish that Messianic Realm by human forces. That was probably the distortion. I'm not entirely clear. So, but nevertheless, that goes, also to Horkheimer and Fromm. They all have that in common. This prophetic idea of social justice and also social equality. And we mentioned already that why the Jews were killed and why 27 million communists were killed and why the liberals killed Marxists already in New York and so on. It all has something to do with that equality and with this justice. You cannot really do justice when you are unequal. We cannot establish real social justice as long as we have that class system. Because justice would mean that you do not take the surplus value away from people. But that is the core, that's the heart of capitalism. That the few who do not work appropriate the surplus value which goes beyond the salary from 200 million workers. And so if you say there must be justice, they could not take that away from them. Justice would mean that the entrepreneur could get a reward for the entrepreneurial qualities or for his inventions or whatever. Let's see, somebody takes the colonial kitchen, and he has this initiative, and he builds that thing, and then he also works in the kitchen still, or as cashier, as little capitalists sometimes do. He should be paid for working in the kitchen. He should be paid for the cashier thing. He should be paid for the entrepreneurial quality, that he had the idea to establish that. That's all fair, but that's not all what he does. While he gets paid for all of this, he also takes all that what the matrices produce beyond their salary. So they produce $100, and they get a salary of $25. The rest is tips or whatever, and the $75, that's the surplus value. That is why everybody is hired. So even if you go to Western, if you get skills, you can of course get a better salary and so on. But the higher the salary is, the more must be what you produce. See, I need, in order to cover my salary, 50 students. So they make me 50 students there. But with these 50 students, they make 5, 6, 10 times more than they pay me in salary. So it is this surplus value, and we do not teach that word, because when people don't have that category in their head, they cannot see what's going on, what happens to them. If somebody sees what happens to them, it can see with Walter, our friend Walter, little Walter, young Walter. His father worked for the military. Then he came home and he worked for a corporation. And he was smart enough to know that they exploited him, and he didn't work anymore. So for years, he was sitting at home, and his wife fed him. He was a nurse, and now he complains he has only $1,000 in Social Security. Of course, if you don't work, you don't get anything. So you cannot live with $1,000. You cannot even live with $3,000. But if he had worked, he could have gotten $3,500 at least. So that means you have to work. That means you're smart enough. You find out that whatever job you do, you will be robbed of your surplus value. But if you don't want to be robbed, you starve to death. And if you don't want to be robbed, you don't even get health insurance, because these liberals, they connected the health insurance with the job. So if you are a lazy bug, they throw you into the slums, and you on food stamps, and you don't even have health insurance. You can die. By the way, that's the only word from St. Paul they took over. You know, who does not work should not eat, from St. Paul. But if you don't eat, you'll die. And liberalism is Protestant, right? The Protestant Presbyterian type of a thing. So it's secularized, but it has still religious roots. And there you see how religion is also embedded in the reproduction, as we said the last time, in the reproduction of the system. You cannot understand sociology or religion or art or anything without seeing how it is part of this reproduction process. To what extent, A, it helps us to survive, B, how it is responsible, or what task it has in the class structure, to what extent it is ideology, to what extent it keeps you from knowing surplus value, or produces an appearance that everything's all right, that in spite of the fact that you're robbed all the time, it's a free country, and they pay millions of dollars for advertisement daily in order to keep that appearance up. But in your sociology department, they will not allow you to make a difference between essence and existence, or essence and appearance. They will say that it's old metaphysics and so on. But if you don't have that separation of essence and appearance, you cannot get the real concept of ideology, namely that religion and science and all that can become ideological. That means false consciousness. The workers think they are middle class, or the masking of class and national interests, and shortly the untruth. So ideology is the untruth. Do we talk that way? No. When we say ideology, it's rather harmless. We think ideology is a combination of ideas and values. Study mathematics and you make a lot of money. That's ideology. That's the American way of ideology. That's not the critical idea of ideology. So, and we have only the known. Nobody except me uses ideology critical, because that's not part of our culture. It's strange, but that is itself part of the whole appearance. So you see the connection, if one has only a formal logic, one does not have the material logic of Plato, Aristotle, or Hegel, or whatever. One says, science is not philosophy. If one develops, even like Katja has it, for instance, unbelievable hate against philosophy, then this category of essence and appearance is called metaphysical. Metaphysicals are thoughts which you have beyond the empirical world, and so it's rejected. But if you don't have that, you cannot have a critical notion of ideology, because you cannot see ideology as an appearance, as a false appearance, as a cover-up, as a masking of what really things are. And the interviews, with the cardinals and so on, and so on, it's all ideology. It is all false appearance, And there were the old cardinals, they interviewed him, and it looked like a very nice, they smile. It's all part of the ideology. You smile, you don't make a serious face, you don't make anybody angry. You cannot get angry or what's really like this guy at the airport there or whatever. You always have to be smooth and keep smiling and so on. So she did ask him something which you could call critical questions, the Pope and the child abuse cases and all this and so. But the old man, was a born ideologue in a Catholic way. So he said, of course, it's a bad thing, but, and then the next sentence he smoothed it out, there's a full foul apples, but all the other apples are beautiful. So it went on, and he was a nice old man, he was a comfortable little old man, and said, no, honey, and talked to her, and it was nice, but it is exactly this nicety, under which all that stuff is hidden. What is hidden? That there was a storm and Jesus was asleep, But even that, when you use that story, it is still a purification of the real what's really going on, you know. Even then, when sometimes something negative is been admitted, you know, by saying Jesus was asleep, well, but they all know he will wake up again. And he all know that he will walk over the water and say, "Come, Peter, get out, walk on the water, you as well." Peter sinks, of course, because he doesn't have enough faith and so on. So, by the way, you know, in the whole Hebrew literature, you have that the psalm starts out horribly, namely Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me?" Mark and Matthew has that. Jesus, in the last moment, after all the Sermon on the Mount, all the beautiful speeches and so on, there the Heavenly Father, he doesn't call him our Father anymore. He says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" An outcry of utter despair. But Fromm points out, you know, in his book on the Dogma of Christ, he has this Psalm 22 in the end. And he says, well, but the psalm ends well. It ends full of hope. And of course, Jesus had a heart attack. And a heart attack, you cannot talk very much anymore. So he just stopped with the first verse and didn't go through. So what is true is that all the psalms, you know, no matter how terrible they start, they all end with a beautiful, optimistic note to them. You see, so it lifts you up in the end. Even in the when you have Nietzsche, you know, and Schopenhauer, they got in trouble at a certain point, and Nietzsche, because Nietzsche thought that Schopenhauer was too optimistic. Schopenhauer was the father of Western pessimism, counterpart of the Gautama, of the Buddha. And but then Schopenhauer had, in the end, a fourth volume, and in this fourth volume he talks about art and about religion and philosophy as ways to conquer the will to life. So the will to life is everywhere, in each of your bodies, the will to life, in the trees, in the animals, in the squirrels, and so on. When they go there and catch my food out there and struggle with each other, that's the will to life. So it is the one thing which is behind all these body forms and so on. So that will to life, it's a very dark type of will of life. It has no hope, you know. And but then there is some hope, namely, you can, in art, you can sublimate this will to life. If you are a porno consumer, porno is in the service of the will to life. It makes some people masturbate, it makes other people, their marriage happier, and so on and so on. It's in the service of the will to life. If you look at the Rubens, for instance, the painting, you know, they had all kinds of voluptuous women walking around, but it will not turn you on. There are all these discussions about, you know, what is porno and what is real art, you know. What in Shakespeare gets porno-like sometimes, you know, but it isn't porno. It is sublimated, it is elevated, sublimated into an artistic form, and thereby we are liberated from the will to life and its pleasures and it being hooked on it and so on and so on. So that is art, and religion does the same thing, and philosophy does the same thing. But Nietzsche said, you know, this is too, that is still optimism, you know, in this whole thing. And there is this thing, you know, that Hitler was a Schopenhauerian. For the 19th century, Schopenhauer was despised by people. He was a dead dog. He taught in Berlin at the same time with Hegel, and he put his class hours, together with Hegel. 300 students went to Hegel. Nobody came to him, not even one of them. People want to have optimism. They want to have that appearance. We cannot stand it, you know, to live always with this darkness or whatever. And so then Schopenhauer went to Frankfurt, and he had a pension, and he lived in Frankfurt and wrote this one book, The World as Will and Representation. Will is the will to life, representation are the images which feed the will to life. The television is full of these images, cars, houses, you know, these are all the images which awaken the will to life in us. The Gautama does the exact opposite. You know, take asceticism, take all these images away, and then you can look at your navel, and then you will be at peace and harmony with yourself. So that is self-redemption. So Schopenhauer, by the way, took the bourgeois position, the anti-revolutionary position in Frankfurt in 1848 when Marx came to Frankfurt. And Marx had hoped the bourgeoisie would ally itself with the proletariat and they would both fight against the first and the second estate. And he was disappointed. The bourgeoisie allied itself with the first and the second estate, and that is the first source of fascism, finally. The Germans got their revolution, but it was a low bourgeois revolution, not a proletarian revolution. And the proletarian revolution in Munich and in Hamburg, and Horkheimer was involved in the Munich one. He was almost executed because they thought he was part of the Marxist revolution. There were two in Munich. But then in the same Munich, the low bourgeois revolution, which is a counter-revolution. Hitler thought he was the most conservative revolutionist, and you know who repeated that? Reagan said, "I'm the most conservative revolutionary." Right? So, and a conservative revolutionary is a counter-revolutionary. And 1989 was a victorious counter-revolution against the Soviet Union, and it was successful. The first one against Lenin failed. 12 American and British and German armies marched in, and they were beaten. And the other one was Hitler. Hitler almost made it. He killed 27 million of them, and then in Stalingrad was crucified. And I have this, just showed you this picture there, we can look at it. Okay, so that as far as the things, but are there any questions about what we said so far? Does that make sense? Is it confusing? Anything else?
I have a question.
Yes. Very good. Thanks for the stop. Yeah.
Oh,
You can
it's probably
stop
not good.
me. You stop me there. Don't let me stop myself.
Just clarification.
Yeah.
When you talk about the Psalms always having a
Yeah.
positive ending,
Yeah.
similar or different from religion dulling, where it doesn't have, like, where they have to make.
Yeah.
Is there any connection to that, or are we,
Yeah, right. That's a good question. Yeah. I mean, what I practically said, and you sense that, is that the Psalms end consoling, right? So, and we have to say that there's nothing wrong with consoling. You could call Christianity a religion of consoling. I just wrote that from Hegel. Hegel called Christianity a religion of consoling. Why? Because Christianity teaches that God wants to help all people. That's how Hegel put it. In reality, there was a struggle between Augustine, who somehow followed the Bible, where Jesus said at one point, he said, the road to damnation is broad, but the path to salvation is very narrow, and only a few will go it. And Augustine repeated that and said, most is he used that word, massa damnata, condemned masses. I was sitting with Gregory Baum, one of the Jewish theologians there in Montreal, and I said, look, Gregory, all these people, there are masses of people, they are all massa damnata. They all go to hell. And only a very few, maybe you, maybe not, will go there, will go the other way. So, and then the interesting thing is the church condemned Augustine, not all the way, but for this thing, and countered it with saying that God's will to save is universal. That is what Hegel meant then, this Augustinian, anti-Augustinian decision. So God does not want only a few, but God wants to help her. He wants to save all people. So if some go to hell, or many, or a few, or whatever, it is their own decision. They decided whether they wanted to go to hell. But as far, and that is very optimistic, of course, that, and very consoling. And so, when Kant, talks about this, that you bring a priest in or minister when you die, so that he should console it, and then Kant would say, but what he should really do, he should not console you. He should say, look, you still have a few hours, maybe straighten something out. Is there something which you can still repent or make good or so, or to sharpen the conscience? But I don't think that Kant or Hegel, or certainly not Hegel, that they were against religion being consoling. The real point is, if it consoles in such a way that it dulls your conscience, then this consolation is opiate. Like for instance, we do have that, Christ is my Savior, Christ my Savior. You can turn that thing on every night on all these stations there. While at the same time, they have killed 1 million in Iraq. And the war has broken out again in Iraq. There are bombings and everything. We spent $900 billion, for that. And 4,500 men have died there. And 10,000 have come home, and psychologically destroyed for the rest of their life and so on. And without any result in the end, as it was predictable. It was based on the lie, and it was not based on realistic things. We didn't know what this country was. We didn't have a Dustin who was a specialist for Islam. We didn't know what was going on there, and so and there is nothing in the churches. All of these people there say Christ is my Savior. If they would say Christ is your Savior, but you also cannot violate the golden rule all the time. You cannot treat all these countries as you never would like to be treated. This is evil. You have to repent that. You have to stop that. You have to make that good, and so on. Nothing, Then it's really a bourgeois religion. It's evil religion. And if that is clear, then also Marx would be understood better. As Marx was not against the golden rule or whatever the prophets said, or justice and so on. What he was against is you people here in London. Why do you make a liar out of him with every deed you do, and that means the Jesus of Nazareth? And the rich people, there was a good man, and the rich people had murdered him, as he told his children, and so on. And Former has that in the back of his book. So, and then the satanic thing is that they then, in terms of saying, yes, Marx, you're right, that our Christianity, that's not Christianity, that's Christendom, as Kierkegaard called it, the same critique. Instead of that, they say, you, Marx, you are an atheist because you say religion is opiate. What he says, bourgeois religion, you damaged shopkeepers, your religion is a fraud, That's what he said. And that means he wanted to have that other religion, which was not a fraud, which he had already, I read that to you, the Abitur thing there, where he was in the Abitur, but it is not only the young Marx, it goes on with the old Marx. Even when he became somewhat bitter, his daughters say he was never bitter, or when he got maybe more authoritarian, other people say he never became so authoritarian. But if something changed in the Capital later on, that, first of all, that justice thing was never forgotten, and then also the attack was always on ideological religion, an opiate religion, and every decent person should be against that opiate religion. And the critical theorists say, this religion is this longing that the murderer shall not triumph over the innocent victim. What is that? That's justice. That means that justice should be done to the murderer, and that justice should be done to the victim as well. That the victims will have all these people whom we bombed to people, all these pregnant women whom we burned to pieces there in Iraq, and lay in the sand now buried and so on, that they will get their day in justice, day of justice, of judgment, against Bush, the super gangster, who's sitting now in his library there and enjoys his old golden days there. I was always amazed, that people can do this. I mean, Hitler really had this idea that after the war was won, he would go to Austria and would sit there and do philosophy. That was his great longing, and would paint pictures and play Wagner on the piano. I mean, they do these outrageous things, and then they want to go home and enjoy their golden years and so. So that, I think, it has led also to the disrespect for religion, which they talk about, obviously. And I think I mentioned that Bader, for instance, a friend of Hegel, wanted to have a critical, irrational theory of religion, which would give people respect again for religion, because the disrespect comes from that fraud, which is around all over the place.
I wonder if the typology of good and bad religion based on consoling, dulling the conscience, etc., doesn't put too sharp an emphasis on kind of a material like aspect of religion. Because if you have the really strong dualism of kind of I guess people take Luther's sola fides, faith alone will save you. The goal of everything in reality is salvation. So all you need is this faith. That's kind of a radical. The material world doesn't matter at all.
Yeah.
So to say that is a bad religion, I think that really pushes to the margin.
I think we have to be careful now. You know, I mean, Kant was a Lutheran, right? So we just looked what Kant said. You know, we could go back further and could say what did Luther say, and the sola fides, you know, or sola scriptura, or this alone means an either-or type of a position. As I mean, Kierkegaard even wrote a book, Either Or. The Catholic position is always as well as. So it is the Bible and tradition. This Pope now, you know, for all his life.
Whether or not that's what Luther meant, fundamentalism, as it's manifested in the last 150 years, ends up being kind of a radical interpretation of that.
Right.
On the far side of like a spiritual existence as the only important thing.
Okay, so we have to take one thing after the other. So if we look at Luther, he broke, you know, this Catholic for 1,000 years, this as well as. So the Catholic has that grace, you know, and works and so on. So as a matter of fact, the justification problem with Luther, and that was the problem of the Reformation, you know, how are we justified? The church had never taught that you are justified by making pilgrimages or going to the monastery or whatever. And then Karl Barth, of course, Siebert and Jung have discussed it, but already the humanists of 1530, 34, 40 and so on knew that this was not, that the church had always taught that the redemption comes from God sending his Son and sacrificing him for the sins of the world and so on. So, but then you should also do something. There's the Sermon on the Mount, after all, you know, and love your enemy and love your brother and sister and the golden rule and so on. That has to be done too. Now, what has happened then there are different branches of Protestantism which comes from Luther and Calvinism. And one branch is liberal Protestantism, right? And that was very strong in this country, Tillich and so on, right? And then you have that fundamentalism Protestantism, you know. And it is this fundamentalist Protestantism which then says, you know, this extreme Christ is your savior, no matter what. So that would mean then to console, and then your conscience doesn't rebel when you live side by side with a slum downtown, and every city has a slum and has these beautiful churches in the slums, and the slums don't go away. They just give some Easter baskets, you know, some Christmas baskets or whatever, and the slums remain there, and you cannot become human in these slums, you know. It's a horrible, dehumanizing type of a thing. So we have to see, you know, when we say wrong and good or bad religion, and what is good and bad, one has to be very careful, and it always has to be inner criticism. That's important for the critic of theory, inner criticism. So you have to say, when you talk about Luther, you know, you have to judge him by his own thinking, by his own teaching, the fundamentalists as well, the Catholics as well, and so on. What do they say? And what Marx does, he says, this is what the New Testament says, and then this is what you do. The New Testament said, you know, don't look for justice there. When you go to court, you know, give him already also his shirt in the Sermon on the Mount and so on. What are you doing? You go to the administration of justice, and you want to have done your right, and so on and so on. You do everything the opposite way, not from how I, Marx, say it, but you do the opposite way of what you are teaching. It is the contradiction between what you are doing as bourgeois, as bankers, and so on and so on, and what you say in the church you ought to do. The Sermon on the Mount is there, and there you do the opposite. There's this article in the Cologne newspaper where you go step by step and step, and that this is what you do, and that's what St. Paul says, you know. You do the exact opposite.
I guess I feel like inner criticism kind of ignores the variety of hermeneutic interpretive activity within a tradition, on some level, because I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone who practices something that is in direct opposition to their understanding of the teachings that they're espousing. So whether or not their understanding is actually what was written whenever it was written, or not, that's not important.
Okay, so what you say
they're
is
doing what they think is what it is.
So what could they have answered him? You know, when Marx says there was once a poor man, and the rich people murdered him. What the bourgeoisie or higher criticism could say, he was not a poor man. Jesus belonged to the middle class or whatever, you know. So whenever you have bourgeois like Parsons or whatever, then Jesus suddenly moves in the middle class. If you have a Marxist looking at it, you know, and interprets that way, then belongs to the poorest to repair the agricultural instruments, you know, the farmers and so on, you know. Now, I mean, that can be empirically found out somehow, you know, where Jesus belonged to. I mean, the Torah was written by middle-class Jews, you know. They were not poor. And therefore, they are much milder about being rich or whatever. For the Hebrew Bible, it is not such a bad thing to be rich. You have to give to the poor, but it's not bad to be rich, you know. But the New Testament was written by the lowest, by the proletariat, you know. And therefore, you have all these sentences. No rich man can enter the kingdom of God. You cannot love capital and God at the same time. You would either hate God and love capital, or hate capital and love God, or whatever. So, but all of this, you know, shows that the people who write that, that's the same thing what you said about sociology. There's also sociology of religious people, you know. So when they interpret, you know, to what extent is it the real text? To what extent does their own status or their own belonging to a class influence what they see, you know? When the Nazis came in and looked at the New Testament, you know, they had a very high opinion for Jesus. But Jesus was for them an Aryan who fought against the Jews. He was an anti-Semite. So they see all these struggles against the Pharisees and so on as the struggle of a Germanic Siegfried there, fighting against the damaged materialistic robbery type of Jews there, you know. And they take even the Talmud. Idea namely that Mary was a prostitute, and she had relations with Gallian soldiers, I mean Roman soldiers from Gallia, and therefore Jesus was a Germanic tribesman, but only half Jewish. But the half-Jews had a chance under Hitler, you know. There were 150,000 half-Jews in the German army. So Jesus could now be called a great man, because for the Nazis, a Jew could not be a great man. But they saw Jesus was a great man. Not as a theoretician, maybe, but other way around. As a theoretician, Jesus was a great man. Not as a practical politician, like Hitler was a great man, or Henry Ford or so. But Jesus was a great theoretician in terms of the ideas he had, and a tremendous success, you know, through 2,000 years and so on. He still fascinates people, and they do certain things because of him. So, yes, I mean, we can take that into consideration, right? When we say inner criticism, then we can take the text and what the people really do, but the people who act, they of course interpret the text in a certain way, right? And so they may interpret the text in such a way that it fits their actions, which Marx thought were so evil in contradiction. That means they will play down the contradiction. For instance, that happens in the following way. Fundamentalists, but also liberal Protestants, they may say the Sermon on the Mount was never intended to be practiced. It was just supposed to show us our sinfulness. That's a fantastic trick. So, I mean, sociology, you know, and I hope you will stay, we talked about it, I hope you will stay in it. It's a very important field, you know. See, when you become reflexive, and it becomes the sociology of sociology, or the sociology of politics, or the sociology of theology, and so on, you know, not only the texts are produced by a certain class, then the text is also interpreted by a certain class. If that is the same class, you have a great chance that you get the same interpretation. But if it's a different class, there will be another interpretation. So you have to make everything reflexive. You take it as immediate, but these texts are also mediated. And the interpretation of the texts are also mediated by individuals. But these individuals also belong to a certain class. With Mohammed, Mohammed was a businessman. Therefore, he has the pillar, you have to pay for the poor. And anybody comes and is hungry or so, you have to give it to him. But at the same time, a sign of wisdom. Hans Küng always called it Augenmaß, the measure of the eye. So Mohammed would say, yes, you can give, but be careful that you don't become poor in the process. So you have to do it with a measure. You give him what you can afford to give him. But don't give him more, because it doesn't make much sense. If you are as poor as he was, then we just have another poor guy. So. But I think that Islam, was a product of the middle class, and so was the Torah. But the New Testament was the product of proletariat. Already the form of the New Testament. Its Greek is so bad that no professor in the University of Athens for 500 years converted to Christianity. Already because of the form. There was the content also, that the body would be resurrected, was appalling for Greek, the cancer, with all this cancer body and all the eating and overeating and miserable bodies. You have to get rid of it and liberate the soul from the body. That the body would be resurrected, as the Pharisees had taught, was a strange thing for Greeks. So, that is the content, but already the form was proletarian. It was Koine English, Koine Greek. Like we have Koine English in the slums, just go there and see how they speak English, right? So that is, the colonial American thing. When you go to Bernard Shaw, he will say the Americans, they have never spoken English, and so on. They don't think that our English is real English or whatever. It was colonial English, When you listen to the dialect in the South or whatever, in terms of the slaveholder system. So. Okay, so does that make sense? What internal critique means? If you add that to that, you want to add that hermeneutical thing to it, then you say Marx compares what the New Testament says with the London bourgeoisie. And Marx says, you bastards do the exact opposite what St. Paul told you, not to go to court and so on and so on, not to hate your enemies and whatever. And then, of course, these ministers, Anglican ministers or priests, they could say, well, Jesus didn't mean it that way, or Paul didn't mean that way. Or just go in any church there. There comes Father Ken, little Father Ken, my priest there, and he says, okay, there are the Acts, and they say they had all goods in common. They sold everything, gave it to Peter, and then from everybody according to his ability to everybody who has been. Then Father Ken will add in the sermon, I bet you, and he has done it 100 times, I listen to it all the time, 50 years already, he will say, well, that is idealized. Well, whoever wrote it, Luke, did not idealize it. He gave a report, But who says it's idealized? Well, it's a bourgeois type of Christianity. It doesn't do anything. Or that's exaggerated, because they're doing something, So it is never so black and white. And one could probably have said to Marx, does everybody in that bourgeois church there in London make a liar out of Jesus, or isn't there a little priest, who's humble and gives something to the poor sometimes, So, Marx was a young man, and young people see that black and white, and there is no gray, So probably one could say to Marx, if you were really just, you would have to see that there were some people probably in London, even belong to the bourgeoisie, who tried to do the right thing, and maybe sometimes did the right thing, So he talks about a whole class of people, and he may leave some people out who were not only reading their Bible, but also try to do some of it as far as they could, So these are the possibilities. They're very, very good, So because, I may add something to that, Marx was trained in the Hegelian logic, and so was Lenin, and so on. When you are trained in this logic, you purify concepts. You take each concept, if it is measure or being or nothing or whatever, in its pure and radical form. That means without application to nature or to history. Now, if you take those pure concepts and you analyze reality in it, you get a very sharp analysis, But you may do injustice to a lot of people, and so it takes a lot of wisdom in this. Lenin read the logic through and through, and made commentary on it and made it into the algebra of revolution, in St. Petersburg, and applied it, But between the pure notions in the logic and then what really happens in nature, for instance, you have a clear concept of plants and of anorganic material, chemical material, and of living organisms. That is how it ought to be according to the notions. That would be a clean type of a nature. But when you really look, particularly down in the oceans, you see little things which look like rocks, but they are already alive, or they are little organisms, maybe with a few cells, but they look like rocks, and it's not entirely clear, Also, the individual species, there are so many crossroads and so many colors inside, which obviously have something to do with the circumstances. That means whatever the plan was, since they live in certain different contexts, they have been diversified. And some of these forms are just absolutely absurd. When you look at some of these fish, they're absurd little creatures, They have all kinds of growth coming out of them, which make no sense whatsoever, So the real notion of a fish, and this little fish is a monstrosity by all these measures, or between plants sometimes. Plant should be a plant, but the plant suddenly starts eating flies, And when you go a little bit further, then the plant starts even to move, and it becomes like a little animal. Or there are little animals which are somehow plant-like. So that's the difference between the logic, and then being, essence, the notion, the idea, and so on. And then when it is realized, so we could say in religious terms, when God creates according to these thoughts, it always falls off somewhere, The plants are not really, and human beings are not really what they are. So then in the Abitur, Marx writes, and man is the only creature who misses its destination, what he ought to become. Well, there are damn a lot of creatures who do not reach what they are supposed to become. If they are compared with their genus type or whatever, or with their species type or whatever, then they are just monstrosities, And they are not the way they ought to be. So that one has to see it. And Marx, operates in terms of this logic through and through. That makes the analysis very sharp. And when you are young, you're very happy about it. Because when you're young, you hate hypocrisy. You have not made all these damned compromises already. You have not yet become a dirty bourgeois yet. From the very beginning, Horkheimer and Pollock and so on had that circle, the island of happiness, where they were disgusted, like Marx was, with that bourgeois thing there. If you look at the old Horkheimer with his factories, and his big house, you say, well, why were they so critical with their parents? They're good parents, They lived a nice life, and they took care of the boy, and educated him, and paid him, and he could make trips and travel and so on. What was wrong with this, But already before 1914, they felt there was deeply running wrong with this bourgeois culture. And by 1915, Horkheimer became CEO in the factories of his father. There was a factory near Frankfurt and a factory near Stuttgart and so on, where they collected, I mentioned already, collected rags, They went into the cities there, the dirtiest places, picked them up and put them in this factory, put chemicals on it. It was stinking, it was hot. All the workers, hundreds of workers worked naked, because they could not have anything on them. The chemistry destroyed their bodies and so on. That's what this culture was resting on, Like the Greek culture, beautiful culture, was resting on slave labor. This culture, however beautiful it is or whatever, rests on the labor of 200 million people, who have to sit there on my roof when it's hot there and have to put the roof on. And then I tell the architect, take it down, it's too hot. It was happened here on this roof, It didn't take it down. He said, I have enough of them. If they fall down, we get another one. So this, that means when you ask and you say, a nice swimming pool, beautiful house, big car, and so on. Then if you ask, who created all this, then the whole culture gets poisoned. And what you have, this Horkheimer is the second generation. So what happened, the first generation came from Poland and so on, dirty Jews, rags themselves, were stinking all over the place. Hitler describes all that in Vienna, But it was not only Hitler who described the dirty creeps coming from Poland and the Ukraine and so on. It were Jews themselves who looked down on these Jews because they hadn't taken a bath for years and so on, because they were poor, But then they rose out of the slums, in 1 or 2 generations and gathered, collected rocks and, made them into real material again. And then suddenly they were rich. And then comes the next generation of the sons who travel everywhere, learn languages and so on, And they suddenly get that bad conscience again. They suddenly learn from the sharpening of the conscience, learn from Isaiah and Jeremiah, and maybe also from Jesus, you should not steal, you should not murder, and so on. And then they get bad conscience and rebel against their fathers. This rebellion was with Horkheimer and with Pollock too, but Horkheimer rebelled against the parents, and out of spite or whatever, he had a girlfriend, and that was Maiden Rose Rieker. She was a British citizen, and her father had been a capitalist and got bankrupt. So she had to serve Moritz Horkheimer. She was his secretary. She was 8 years older than Horkheimer, and he fell in love with them. They moved out, they didn't get married. They slept there in their house, and it was only when Horkheimer was a professor in Frankfurt University when he one night woke up, or Sunday morning or whatever, he woke up and he said to Maiden, he said, it probably would be better if we could get married, because, professors should be married. It was a long time ago, by the way. And so then she said, well, is that the hell why you woke me up? It isn't worth it. But it was 50-year-old long marriage, and it was a good marriage. And they had no children, but they were loving each other up to when she got in 1969 she got a heart attack in Mirandola in Switzerland. The same year when Adorno got a heart attack too, also in Switzerland. And Fromm also died in Switzerland, so Switzerland is the paradise where they want to go in the end. Okay, but very good remarks there, but the main thing is that we understand, what inner criticism means now, and we applied it, and I think we got to an important point, First of all, these clear concepts, and then the reality, to which nobody can measure up, in a certain sense, Not the rocks, not the little plants, not the fish, not the animals, not the human beings, and so on. It all somehow falls off the cliff, of judgment. If the notion of family is taken, the notion, marriage, poverty, education of children. Look, when you have family, just look at television when they have family stories, they are family movies, There is little about education of children, the most is the trouble which the two marriage partners have with each other, day and night, in and out, and so on. Or then the grandparents come in and the whole struggle with the grandparents, and so on. Not a word about property. There is a little property. Usually they are low bourgeois houses, where the whole movie takes place, and so on. But the education of the children is a catastrophe, and so it doesn't show. Or let's see, a sociologist, a social worker, goes into a family, and it's sociologically a family, but then he says, when he sees the dishes falling around and shouting and screaming and so on, he says, this is not a family. See, if he does that, factually, it exists. The family exists. But he says it's not a real family. So the difference between existence and real. A state can exist, but it can be a failed state. What is real? Real is something only insofar as it conforms to its notion, the notion of a state. Which is then a failed state. It falls off from what a state should be. Internal state law, external state law, historical process. Look, all the wars, the 25 wars which we had since 1945, none was declared according to the Constitution. That means all these people in the last 50 years acted against the Constitution. The Constitution is the substance and the foundation of the state, and they do not follow it. See this, and so I think it is good to mature. At least you have to take into consideration, that really nothing measures up really against the pure notion. But on the other hand, nothing is real without having some part of the notion. It may exist, but it is not real. So these notions which are used now are themselves part of that logic. And none of the critical theorists, including Fromm or whatever, can be understood without that logic. So they do not follow the Aristotelian logic anymore, which was the only logic which went through slavery, feudalism, to the first 200 years of modernity. And then the logic was changed. You were trained in the formal logic, which goes back to Aristotle. But since that time, we have a material type of a logic. And that is what General Zhukov had when he conquered the Nazis. That's what General Jab did when he beat us in Vietnam. And the Baath Party now, they're in Iraq. They will just do what they want to after we are all gone and so on. So that is far superior, But there may be the similar things with the Aristotelian or the Platonic logic too. Plato wrote that book about the state, where he unfolds the idea and the notion of the state. And then he thought there should be guardians and people would all love each other and so on and so on. And it didn't happen, As a matter of fact, when he came with this idea to Syracuse in Sicily, they wanted to sell him on the slave market, He had a hard time to get off the slave market. Then he wrote another book about the laws, in which this idea and what really happens, was mediated by the law and the enforcement of the law and so on. I think, the highest level of civil society is police. Just think that for one night, this country would not be policed. Hell would be right loose, when it works, we are not even aware of it. That every moment you are breathing, you have to be grateful, to the police force, in spite of the fact that you don't see, but they are cruising around all over the place, with their little blue lights there. And they have the telephones, and as soon as something, yip, there, and it happens in my street here sometimes, the son who wants to kill his mother all the time over there, yip, they're all here, Oh, recently there were these little gangsters were up there in the background of this house, 15 cars around here with dogs and everything. That is what keeps society together. Hobbes, we had mentioned him, or is right to some extent. It's a war of everybody against everybody, and it can be only controlled that everything is policed. Not only the red lights, green lights, or so. Policing of the business cycle, policing of the corporation, the monopoly laws, and so on. That is policing, no wonder that they show these police movies all the time, you know, law and order, you know, these are all police movies. It would be absolute chaos with this type of this police, you know. That means it would completely fall off what can be called a society, or what can be called a family, or whatever. So, I mean, what you really call us as is that we should be merciful in a certain sense, you know. What is an idealist? You know, Hegel is the greatest idealist who has ever lived. Every bird is an idealist when you observe them out there, because the bird does not respect the little seeds, which are the way how grass multiplies, you know. He eats it. An idealist is who does not take the thing there serious, transforms everything what is there, theoretically or practically, into himself. That's an idealist, you know. So a tremendous emphasis on the subject and no respect for the object. The materialist is somebody who emphasizes the object and subordinates somehow the subject to it. So, you know, you have to look at the thing there. That's important, you know, not the subjectivity. Fichte, who's buried besides Hegel, gave in the Dorothean cemetery in Berlin. He is the one who gave Hegel the idea of subjectivity, which was an important element in the development of his idealistic type of thing. But we call, you know, unessential things idealistic sometimes, you know. This guy gives some idea, so he's an idealist or whatever. So, but there is, you know, there are different meanings, and the real, if you want to see what an idealist is, then Hegel would be an idealist who has thought it through most consequentially, you know. But everybody who applies that must be aware, you know, that there is a difference between the pure idea of a state, of a society, of a family, and then what's walking around there. It is not so that it is, see, that Marx was young when he said all that, you know. If he was a little bit older, he would have mitigated a little bit, and he would have said, you know, okay, not all families in London are dirty bourgeois families, you know. Some families have adopted children, you know. Some people do really good work with the education of their children. Like Dustin did with the children there, and the stupid court didn't see it, you know. That would have to be mitigated, you know, because otherwise you can become very judgmental, and you do great injustice to people, you know, because they may really try their best, you know, but the Brecht always sang in his songs, but the circumstances are not that way. He said everybody wants to be in the light, everybody wants to be in the kingdom, but the circumstances, I have the song over there, it's in German unfortunately, but, and he made, you know, so he took the side of the circumstances which people are not powerful enough, you know, to conquer and to do the good thing. And so once I almost got a heart attack when Mike Ott and I, we read a play by Brecht about an army chaplain. Army chaplain. I mean, I cannot even talk about him without laughing anymore. The army chaplain had a little car with an altar on it in the back. And he was traveling through the snow in Russia, and he was on the way to Stalingrad. What he wanted to do with the altar in Stalingrad is not entirely clear. And then the Nazis had a strange attitude, you know, to army chaplains. They thought that some people cannot die without a priest. And so they had army chaplains, and the Pope made a concordat with him, 1934, which guaranteed that these army chaplains would be there. So there was one of them. And so he was with his miserable car on the way to Stalingrad, and it was snowing. I was in a damaged Russia. Everything was snowing all the time. Like when Dustin, we came to Moscow, it was snowing, of course. Palm trees down there at the Black Sea, and then snowing all over the place. So, and then he also had vodka, and was already half drunk with his altar and his truck there. And then comes a soldier from Bohemia, which was not a real German, but half German, but he had been drafted. So, and he was also on his way to Stalingrad, and so they met there in a crossroads, and it can be miserable in Russia, out of some reason or the other. So, nevertheless, the army chaplain, who was in officer rank, gave an order to this Bohemian guy to go to the next cottage there and get him more vodka. He said, I'm out of vodka. And then he says, I'm also out of gasoline. He said, these damned Nazis, they never give me gasoline enough. They will feel it on Judgment Day. They haven't given me this gasoline. So, and then he finally gets a little bit gasoline from somewhere too, and then he drives on with his altar there to Stalingrad. I don't know if ever got there or whatever. But this Brecht has this, and Brecht was a nihilist for some time, and he wrote, and my wife never liked him because of these nihilistic elements. But then one night he was standing in Berlin on the balcony, and he saw how this police was shooting at striking workers who were marching there, communists, and they were shot and so on. And that night Brecht became a Marxist then. But he had this, on one side, had these pure concepts of Marxism, what justice is, and on the other hand, he had this deep mercy and compassion also for the people who wanted to do the good thing and wanted to go into the kingdom and so on. But there are the circumstances, and the circumstance, of course, capitalism. That means you cannot talk about that army chaplain, you cannot talk about wars, you cannot talk about concentration camps without getting capitalism in. And until a few years ago, we did not even talk about capitalism. This capitalism thing came up with the crisis there, with the depressions and so on. But I remember that for 30 years I was here on campus and nobody talked about capitalism. And then suddenly, the people mentioned it again because it became a problem again and so on. And the 2008 finance crisis is not even over now. It's, brought that idea back again. But all the Brecht and all the critical theorists have that in common, that capitalism as a mode of production, capitalism as a mode of how we make a living and how we eat and drink and house and dress ourselves and so on. And remember the last time we made the difference between traditional theory and critical theory. And what the critical theory makes it different from the traditional one is that it is fully aware about the reproduction process of work as the transformation of nature through which we also transform ourselves. That's one thing. But then the critical theory adds something else to it. About 10,000 years ago, we went from fishermen and hunters and so on to agriculture, and then villages, and then towns. And you have that, by the way, also in that article there, which is the first chapter of that book there, which we Dustin bought. So then the cities, and then the civil society, and then private property, and the just wars, and so on. So as the human species reproduced itself in tribes and different civilizations in Mesopotamia, Egypt, Hindu Valley, and also the Yellow River, and so on, which is a high civilization, which led very late, inside of civil society and with civil society also developed then the difference between the few and the many, between the one king in Africa and the tribe and the magician and so on, but also between the slaveholders and the slaves, and between the few lords and the serfs, and between the capitalist, the owner of capital, and the wage laborers. And the critical theory is different from the traditional theory, that it is not only aware of the class conflict, but that it sees itself also as an instrument in this class conflict, to formulate it, to make it conscious to people, and to direct it toward the goal which Marx had formulated already, which we call the alternative future number 3, the realm of freedom on the realm of necessity, natural, biological as well as economic necessity, and the classless society. So there was a classless society in the beginning, the hunters and so on, they had all their instruments in common, and then comes the historical process in which the split occurs between the classes, with the hope that then a communistic society will come about, which will not be the first one, which will be the classless society of the beginning, plus the whole process in between, both of them, A and B, summed up in C. That means C, the communist society of the future, will contain all the progress which has been made in between, because it is necessary that this process happen, which by the way is still a philosophical and theological concept in Marx there, that this happens with necessity. With necessity, the slaveholders come up in the feudal laws and disappear. The feudals come up and disappear, and the capitalists come up and disappear. To some extent, if there must be masters or not has something to do with scarcity. So to the extent to which the transformation of nature brings us more and more in control of nature and makes us richer and richer, the basis is established on which then a classless society can be achieved. And so there were socialists, and Marx called them utopists and so on, who thought that with the reproduction process, metabolism with nature, we are getting richer and richer, the internal process of the class division would be resolved. The Social Democrats have that to some extent. That means the more the instruments of production, the productive forces, are increased and become richer and richer, the less there is a need for a ruling class. Or at least the better will be the fate of the workers. The shorter will be their working hours. The more intensive their work is, the less they have to work. The quality of the work reduces the quantity of work. And you can go down from 12 hours to 8 hours or to 6 hours and so on. It's very strong in France and so on. And then the more or less working hours you have, which is necessity, the realm of necessity, the more you have to the realm of freedom, where Marx would say, I want to get up in the morning and go fishing, and then I want to play a little piano, and then I want to write a critical article, and then I want to read a nice book, and so on. So that was funny now, that was ironical and so on. But he meant that one could do, after the necessary work had been done, and everybody would share in that, then you could do photography and painting and music and so on. And where I saw this, realized in a wonderful way was in the kibbutzim. There were kibbutzim who were 3,000 people, were communistic. I ate with them in the morning and at noon and so on. And I met some of the Russian intellectuals in the University of Haifa, and I gave talks there, and they gave me something to eat afterwards. And I said, that shows the state of Israel is still democratic, because you still gave me something to eat. Because I said horrible things, and they still gave me something to eat. But these intellectuals worked out every step in the kibbutzim. So, for instance, they produced glass, windows. They could have done 16,000 windows a week. They produced only half. They said, that's what we need as necessary work. And then the other hours we do well, they had photography, they had dancing, folk dancing, some did painting and so on. What do you do with the old people, who don't work anymore? They put all the old people in the middle of the kibbutzim, and of the kibbutz. And when the little children there who lived in a kindergarten, and later on they were taken back to the parents, they modified the whole thing. So then the children, all in the morning on the way to school, go through the old people's part. See the grandmother, see the grandfather, and so on. And when they come back, they say hi to the grandmother again, and so on. They go 3 times a day, so the grandfather, grandmother are never alone, never lonely. I mean, if they want to be lonely, they just lock the door and give them a little bit of milk and give them little cookies and so on. And so they love the grandfather, and the grandfather loves them. And so they think of all these little things, And when they modify, they know, that there is of course selfishness in people, or that they are over-individualized. They told me, you can never live here, and I must admit to that. I could not have lived in East Germany. If you get 40, 45 or whatever, and you have been individualized, you cannot fit anymore. Even in the army it gets bad already, but not in a holy club like this. It's awful. So, they practice this, and then also for some time, whoever left, like leaving the priesthood, or the Pope now leaving the papacy, and so usually there was a violent reaction, and it is in Germany now. But they stopped that. So you serve 3 years in the Israeli army, men and women. After the 3 years, the kibbutz pays for you a whole year in Tel Aviv. And there you can see the whole Kabbalistic life. You can see as much porno as you want to, can go to the prostitutes, can go into the coffee shops, whatever you want to do. And then if you like that Kabbalistic life, then you can stay, and you can get a job and go to university or whatever. And if you want to come back, then you have to make a decision, And if you come back, they pay everything. They send you to Paris, in order to get a philosophy doctor or medical doctor or whatever. But you are obligated to come back and work for the kibbutz. And then you get a car. You never own a car, but you get all the cars you want. You can go to vacations, and they pay the whole vacations for you. But you own nothing. You don't own the house. That is, being thing. That's what Abraham, when he went to the desert, Moses went into the desert. Desert is a beautiful example for being without having. You have a little bit. You have a tent, or a tabernacle, and a camel, and so. So you do have, what you need for your life or whatever. But the emphasis is on being and not on having. And that
It's about 20 after 8. Do you want to take a break?
Yeah, very good. So, okay, let me just say one last word about contemporary issues, and then we can go to something else. There is this austerity thing going on, and I just want to, for a minute, explain this. As our contemporary issue, on Friday, this austerity thing which set in automatically if they don't change it tomorrow, which is very unlikely. So we have that in Greece, right, the austerity thing, and Greece exploded, We have it now in Italy. Yesterday were elections, and they threw the austerity guy out. And other people, it was a businessman whom they had put in order to do that, and he was fired. He was voted down. And the Germans had to bail out Greece, and they are still doing that. And it cuts. Every day they bring all the things they will cut. Thousands of teachers will have to leave, firemen, and so on and so on and so on. And military even, and military production too. Everything will be cut. And but what I want to point your attention to, in the sense which I just mentioned, that the critical theory is not only aware of the reproduction by changing nature and becoming richer and richer, more in control, but also that in the same process society splits between the haves and the have-nots, between those who control and those who are controlled, those who are exploited and those who are exploited, and so on. When you see the struggle in the House and the Senate, nobody necessarily talks about class struggle. Sometimes people do come out and say, that is class warfare. Or this president makes the poor envious of the rich, Or what Romney said in the country club there, these are the 47% who depend on the government, But we are these preneurs, we are these, geniuses, and we work hard, and so on. We do it all at once. And then the president said, nobody does that, do it once, does it alone. I mean, Ford had 70,000 people who built all that for him, and so on. So, but what you see is that one party, the Republican Party, which gets into self-demise or whatever in this whole process, they stick up therefore not closing the loopholes, not taxing the rich any further, the billionaires, and so on. And on the other side, you have the Democratic Party and the president, but people who are more radical even, who want to, tax the rich and not giving up anything of the entitlement. And you see that the ironical thing now is there is no socialistic party. There is not a socialistic party which says, you know, the 200 million there shouldn't lose their entitlements and their taxes should also not go up, but we should tax the rich. So it is a bourgeois party, because we have only two bourgeois parties. We have only two capitalistic parties. We have only two liberal parties. Only one is neoliberal and the other one is Roosevelt liberal, the New Dealer. The New Dealer. So the question is, you know, why does one party, which is the bourgeois party, suddenly wants to have $9 minimum wage, for instance, you know? And there's a difference between them. That means you have one almost radical type of a party which insists that the rich remain rich, and the others are lazy bugs, you know, they are welfare creeps and so on, and need student loans and whatever, you know, and they are just the losers, you know. And that's how it must be. That means the antagonism is there, but inequality is necessary. That's Hitler too. And then the other party, and the Nazi party have that too, says no, we have to give something to those 200 million. So we want to give them the possibility of the opportunity, freedom of opportunity. So some of them get student loans, and then they can study, and then they can move from the fourth estate to the third estate, and the rest of them remain. So both parties are bourgeois, both parties have the class system, both parties think the class system cannot be changed, and ought not even be changed, except that we take some individuals up there. And then we have to give them some gifts sometimes. So then these $9 there, minimum wage. But the other guys who defend the rich there say, no, then you lose jobs, you know. The employers will not employ anybody when you go up to $9, and which was, of course, never true empirically. But it shows that the entrepreneur or the CEO even, you know, is an employee himself. The CEO can make 1 million, 5 million, or whatever a month, you know, and they don't want to give that poor guy there who watches the door or office clerk and so on, to give him $9 so that when he works hard all week long, he at least can pay his rent. Because with the minimum wage now, $7.50 or $8 or whatever, even when both work together, they cannot pay the rent or the heat or the food or whatever. So that means the class struggle is there. It's furious. It stops the whole machinery. They will not have enough money next week for the government to pay. For the government is running and so on. So that means the class struggle is frozen. The things could be changed, you know, if the 200 million, or many of them, would not think they were middle class. That means they don't know that they are working class. They have a false consciousness, as Marx would call that, and Hegel, that's from Hegel. That means they are caught by this ideology. They are caught by the appearance that they have 2 cars, and that they have a house. So they think because they have that, that's the middle class. And their grandfather did only have 1 car, or didn't have any car, or bicycle. And so they have improved, and their son goes to Western. Now, then he will move into the middle class. Therefore, they think they are already in the middle class. So then when you want to tax the rich, they say, no, I don't want the rich to tax, because my son may become rich, and then my son will be taxed. The whole thing is idiotic. It is satanic, you know. And it is at the same time frozen. The Europeans call that frozen. Our party system is frozen. See, they don't allow a socialistic party who could remove that false consciousness or whatever. They also do, and that's a good thing, they do not allow the fascist party neither. So, at least not for the time being. The Republican Party, you know, sucks up the fascists, and the Democratic Party sucks up the socialists. So that is how they have a balance, but that's how they freeze it. And that has a tremendous consequence now, because there are too many different issues accumulating in both parties. So that the Romney then has to address himself to the social conservatives, and to the fiscal conservatives, and to the Tea Party, and so on, and the guy gets nuts. That means he is talking opposite things all the time. And then people say, you are not consistent. It's not Romney's case that he's not consistent. What is not consistent is his party, which has so many contradictory type of issues and interests involved. And the same thing on the other side. The president has not all Democrats behind him. There are Democrats who are really socialists and they think he's a traitor, And there are others who are left of the center or whatever, a little bit right of the center, and then they think he goes too far, he's a communist, he's a socialist, and so on. So this is a nut house, By the way, last word now. When we talk about pathology, we have to know what is healthy, right? I mean, when somebody says, you have this and this illness, as we had in psychopathology, of the body, then we must know what a healthy body is. That means the heart has to pump so many times a minute, 60 times or whatever. That's a healthy heart. And the lungs the same thing, and the appendix doesn't do anything, non-functional, and so on. But that's a healthy body, right? And then you have to go on diet and whatever. Only when we know what a healthy body is, do we know that something's wrong with it, and we can talk about pathology. Now, something similar is true, we cannot really talk about a sick society or pathology of reason or pathology of spirit or whatever if we don't know what a healthy society is. What is there in this Rousseau, for instance, who started this whole thing, who also thought that there was a state of nature when everything was all right. When we were living from inside, we followed our needs and so on. But then a situation came where we had to talk with other people, and we had to do suddenly what other people expected us to do. Reflect on yourself, to what extent you do what you really feel you need to do, or to what extent you do something because it is expected in your group. And the more the civilization grew, the more these expectations grew, and the more people became alienated from themselves, from their inner need system, and to that extent society became sick. That is the bourgeois, that is Rousseau's critique that something was wrong. Remember, the bourgeoisie was revolutionary once. They invented the idea of ideology, and not Marx and so on. And Hegel was a bourgeois himself. So we see that the idea, that society is sick, was already an insight which the bourgeoisie had. The bourgeoisie became then conservative after they came into power. When the charge was with the nobility and the clergy, they were very radical and very revolutionary, and Rousseau was the one who formulated things for them. So I just want to leave you with that thought, that we cannot talk about pathology without having some concept of what a healthy society is. Fromm talks about the sane and the insane of society. So if we say this is insane, or the shooting is insane, or this blockage, that Congress and the Senate cannot move. One said, that Senate should get off his ass. Then they thought that was anal language. It doesn't belong to Congress. But the guy said it anyway, so they should get off their ass. And then the House, the Senate says the House should bring up a bill. The damn it, House has not brought up a bill. And so that is class struggle, right? That means because too many workers vote for the Republicans, therefore the Republicans can make it. If the workers would be workers, they would never work for the Republicans' vote. The Republicans could never get into office. The Republicans can only get into office because the propaganda machine keeps the workers in the state of false consciousness. That is the pathology of reason. So, but we have to work more on this, how Rousseau got to this. I mean, how do we know what a healthy society is in the first place when we are living in a sick one? Where does one get from? The analogy with the medical doctor, he sees some healthy, hopefully still some healthy bodies walking around there. And the medical science of the last 2,500 years or so has established certain measurements, how your breathing and your different organs, how they have to function. That's healthy, and the other one's not. And then as soon as they measure this, they see, well, this is too high, this is too low. It's quantitative to a large extent. and therefore something is wrong. Can what the natural sciences do, can the social sciences, can sociology, and so on, do something similar, or can we just study the facts, and measure and have statistics and so on, but take it just what is the case. What is the case is also normal. And if you don't know the difference between essence and appearance or whatever, you may simply follow this positivistic metaphysics of what is the case. So, this murder rate, well, that's the case. People always murdered, and they will continue to murder, and we murder a little bit more because we are a little bit more people and so on. So slowly you get also, apologetics, and you become an ideologue, and you betray the calling of the university to find the truth. So I think it's completely forgotten in what we talk about, the correctness of protocol sentences, So it rains or it doesn't rain, So one sentence is correct, the other one is not correct, But that has nothing to do with the truth whatsoever. Okay, so let's make a break now. What is the time? What do we?
About 25 minutes left.
25 minutes left. So 5 minutes break, and then we want to maybe continue our movie there, and let's take once more, maybe if it's the pianist there, and that is our fun time. Thank you for the tests you gave me, and you have a break. Enjoy your break. You have deserved it. Where's our friend from Saudi Arabia? Let's see what we do with him.
No, there's something I forgot to give you.
But you won it, isn't that right?
Yeah, it
This
is.
man put his neck on the line. Your objection, Your Honor. Will both counselors approach the bench?
Do we have something? What is it? Oh,
That's the one that's going to be at Harvard.
did it come out already?
It comes out in April.
Oh.
They sent me the proof.
Oh, they sent you the proof. Oh, good. Can I keep this?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, thank you. Well, I can show it to you. That's our Harvard article there.
Ah, very nice.
We're very proud of it.
Your Honor.
Can we pull the curtain there, maybe? Then they don't see us outside. We're hiding. There's our pianist already. So we don't have the same again, right?
No,
Okay.
it starts up right where we left off.
Okay. Oh, you can close it, very good. Okay, just let's rest for a moment. If you have any questions still, you can ask me. Ask each other. Online, that's nice. The students are talking with each other, and I can sleep. But not too long. It's quite interesting when they come in there with all their opinions and talk to each other. And usually they are a little bit too general. The hard thing is to become specific, because everybody is critical. And
Oh, they are, huh?
yeah, but they are. In order to get to the meat, they have to be more specific. So don't forget the cookies there. Enjoy your cookies.
You have to keep copies of all the letters back that you sent them, and then it can be your next book.
Yeah, I don't know where they're going.
I
I think they are all the property, by the way, there is another robbery there. These programs are all the property of the university. That means they can take it away from me and let somebody else teach it.
Mm-hmm. Well, they did that one time with me.
Yeah.
When I built that class,
Same they should.
and we put it into the catalog, and then that one guy there who didn't get anybody in his classes wanted to have it,
Yeah.
and so they had to pull it from me and they had to give it to him.
Really?
Merzeller, remember him?
Oh, really?
The real nut job, the Kurdish
Yeah, right.
Kurdish guy who was just real nutty.
So what did they do to you?
Falk wanted me to teach a class called Women in Islam,
Uh-huh.
and so I developed it, produced
Oh,
you know
you
the
did?
syllabus and everything,
Uh-huh.
got the approval. Well, then he saw it and he wanted it, and his class wasn't going through,
Mm-hmm.
and so, you know, because he was tenured or whatnot,
Oh,
I had to give it to
God.
him. And then, you know, I talked to people who took it, said it was the worst class they ever had.
Yeah.
And they had he had all the girls up on the front of the classroom, belly dancing and things like that.
Yeah.
What?
Oh, he was such an idiot.
I did a visitation in his
Terrible.
class once.
He was an idiot. If there ever was one.
He doesn't want to talk with me anymore.
No, he wanted to.
Copy of Orientalism.
Oh, yeah, right. He wanted to bring over some scholar from somewhere in Central America, and he wanted me to come visit his house to talk about it. I said, it's fine. So I came over and talked about it. And then he wanted me, and this is when I was getting my MA, he wanted me as a grad student to contribute $5,000 so he could bring him. I was like, what the hell are you talking about? Yeah, right.
Well, he was in the department, he was shouting and screaming. It was unbelievable.
Yeah.
And they were so afraid of him because of his status there.
Well, yeah,
He
and he
was,
said
what, from Turkey somewhere?
he's from Kurdish. Well, he was Kurdish.
Kurdish, yeah.
But then he would say all the time, they hate me because I'm Muslim, they hate me because I'm Muslim. And then at that time when I went to his house to talk to him, he said, well, I'm not Muslim, I'm Christian, but I don't really believe in it. I only do it for my wife that I'm Christian, but I'm not Muslim either. And how the hell are you saying that they hate you for your Muslim? He
But
went
they
from-
were frightened of it, you know,
Yeah.
that this is a very sensitive stuff.
And he went from department to department to department because
Right.
everyone wanted to get rid of him.
Yeah, from the English department to us, right?
Well, I think it was from African American studies or something
Oh.
to religion,
Where is he
and
now,
then
the
I
English
think they
department?
kicked him out to the English department or something.
He was a weird bastard.
Nutty. All right, do you want to start this?
Yeah, let's start it.
Okay. David, that's our new article that comes out in Harvard here.
Great. Great. When's it coming out?
April.
Cooperate.
Comes out in April.
We have a call. Can we make it a little louder? That
Yep.
I can hear?
Great. Oh, what a work.
Can we make it a little louder?
Louder than that?
Okay, we know again what that is, right? There is this pianist, Polish pianist, Polish and Jewish, radio pianist. He played on the radio, so he's known in the city, in the country.
That's why I always say, look on the bright side.
And this is in the ghetto, and the Jews are working in the ghetto. Jewish people are working. Nazi prejudices, they're always in circulation. They're ladybugs, but they're not.
See what uniforms they're making, Rudy?
Huh?
They're making German uniforms.
Yeah, right,
There's a uniform on the left.
right.
It won't help you anyway. Thank you, Mr. Schultz.
Oh, he wants to help his father or whatever. So these are Jewish policemen, so they have their own police force in the ghettos and in the camps. 1942, the Germans were already in Russia. Stalingrad is coming up. Remember, from the conspiracy, we had the same time frame. That could be the briefcases, the suitcases for the people who went to the concentration camps.
At least we got work in the ghetto, eh? At least we're still together.
Remember, it was a middle-class Jewish family. Now they don't live as a middle-class Jewish family anymore. They were all removed into the Folter state.
Das sind Sie angestellt. Wir haben unsere Arbeitserlaubnis.
I don't know if this is an assessment. The army was supposed to be different, but they found out a few years ago that the army cooperated in all these things.
Die anderen zieht euch an und meldet euch dann hier zurück. Und bringt euer Zeug mit. 15 Kilo, nicht mehr.
Wohin bringen Sie uns?
Certificate from Siebert.
Just hope that Henry can tell Lena will be